The cameras were rolling, and Linda Patterson, 58, a retired school administrator from Little Rock, Arkansas, had just been asked to name something a woman does to prepare before leaving the house, and she pressed the buzzer with both hands, leaned into the microphone with the calm, absolute certainty of a woman who has lived 34 years of marriage and developed, from that experience, a very specific and deeply informed worldview, and told 300 studio audience members and approximately 14 million eventual home viewers that the thing she does most before leaving the house is check to see if her husband is still breathing. Steve Harvey froze mid-step. He did not complete the step. He stood with one foot slightly ahead of the other, in the precise posture of a man who has heard something and is rapidly calculating whether he is actually allowed to respond the way every cell in his body wants to. He looked at Linda. Linda looked back at him with the calm, expectant expression of a woman who considers this a perfectly reasonable answer to a perfectly reasonable question and is waiting, patiently, for the confirmation. The studio audience had already gone. Every single one of them. All 300 at the same moment, in the uncontrolled way of a crowd that has been hit by something it absolutely did not see coming. It was a Thursday evening in Atlanta, March 6th, and the Family Feud studio had the particular charged, alive feeling it gets when an all-women's bracket episode is being taped. There is something about 5 women on each side of that stage that the audience picks up on immediately. A different energy, a different register of communication, a different set of possibilities for what might be said and how it might be received. The Patterson family from Little Rock, Arkansas, had arrived in coordinated purple blazers that Steve noticed the moment they walked through the curtain. He stopped walking and looked at them. "I see y'all dressed for success," he said with visible appreciation. The family laughed. Across the stage, the Martindale family from Nashville, matching in teal, stood with the polished readiness of people who had also planned their outfits and were fully prepared to compete. Steve straightened his tie. He looked out at both groups of women standing on either side of the podium. He said, with a particular expression he reserves for this specific kind of episode, "Lord, give me strength." The audience cheered. The crew laughed. Steve shook his head and grinned in the way of a man who is actually looking forward to whatever happens next and is completely at peace with not knowing what it will be. But nobody in that studio was prepared for what Linda Patterson was about to say. Linda had been married to her husband Gerald for 34 years. When Steve asked during the pregame introduction how long she had been married, and she said 34 years, he placed a hand over his heart and said, "That is absolutely, genuinely beautiful." Linda said, "It has its moments." The audience laughed. Steve looked at her more carefully now, with the expression of a man who has just made a very specific identification. He recognized the tone of a woman who was going to be the best part of this episode. He knew it from the way she said its moments, not bitterly, not with regret, but with a particular combination of love and honesty that only arrives after 34 years of sharing a bathroom with someone. The first question was simple and standard. Name something a woman does to prepare before leaving the house. Linda's daughter Renee, 32, answered first and said fixes her hair, which landed at number 2 on the board with 31 points. Solid, clean, thoroughly correct. Linda's sister-in-law Carol, 55, stepped up next and said checks her lipstick, which appeared at number 4. Also correct. Also solid. The Patterson family was building well. They were being sensible. They were giving the survey answers the survey expected. And then it was Linda's turn at the buzzer, and Linda stepped forward, and no amount of preparedness in the known universe was sufficient for what came out of the microphone. Steve asked, "Name something a woman does to prepare before leaving the house." Linda pressed the buzzer without hesitation. She leaned in. She said, "Check to see if my husband is still breathing." The studio fell completely silent for exactly 2 seconds. And then 300 people lost their minds simultaneously. Steve Harvey's jaw dropped. He turned to his left. He turned to his right. He turned fully toward the audience. He turned back to Linda. "Check to see if your husband is still breathing," he repeated, carefully, the way you repeat something you need to hear out loud before you can process it. Linda nodded. "Every morning," she said, "every single morning before I go anywhere, I stand at the side of the bed and I watch for movement." Gerald has a tendency to sleep like a man who has already departed this earth. Very still. Very quiet. No visible indication of continued existence. I have called his name from the doorway 3 times this month alone and had to wait a full 7 seconds for confirmation that he heard me. Steve took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes with his entire hand. "Why doesn't he just set an alarm?" Steve said. Linda looked at him with the expression of a woman who has considered and rejected this idea. "Gerald sleeps through alarms," she said. "I am the alarm." Steve walked to the other side of the stage and stood there for a moment with his back to the audience, shoulders visibly moving. When he turned back around, his face was red and he had stopped trying to control it. "Linda," he said, "I want you to know that Gerald is a deeply lucky man." Linda said, "Gerald does not know how lucky he is." The survey board revealed its verdict. Check to see if husband is still breathing was not among the answers. The strike sound played. Steve announced this result with the expression of a man who has been personally, spiritually offended by a survey's failure of imagination. The survey, Steve told the audience directly, did not ask the right 100 people. The audience disagreed with the survey loudly and at length. Linda accepted the result with a single, dignified shrug that contained more commentary than most people manage with full paragraphs. The next revelation came from Linda's cousin, Patrice, 44, who had, according to Linda's earlier introduction, never once in her entire life given an answer that made anybody feel calmer about anything. Patrice approached the buzzer the way people approach a witness stand, with a contained, purposeful energy of someone who has a statement prepared and intends to deliver it regardless of how it is received. Steve asked, "Name something you would find in a man's medicine cabinet that surprises you." Patrice looked at Steve. She looked at the board. She looked back at Steve. She said, "A diary." Steve said, "A diary." He confirmed the word. He let it exist in the air between them for a moment. "In the medicine cabinet," he said. Patrice nodded. Men hide things in places women would never think to look. The medicine cabinet is genius. Nobody goes in a man's medicine cabinet. It is the perfect concealment location. Steve thought about this. He thought about it for a genuinely long time, which told the audience something about the quality of the logic. "Have you specifically been in someone's medicine cabinet?" he said. Patrice looked at him with steady, undeflectable eyes. "I have been married twice," she said, "and I check everything. Every surface, every drawer, every cabinet." Steve turned to the board. Cologne, razor, antacids, aspirin, no diary. He turned back to Patrice. "The survey found no diaries," he said. Patrice said, "The survey did not ask my ex-husbands." And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry laughing. Linda's youngest daughter, Amber, 26, was next at the podium. Amber was a kindergarten teacher, a fact that had been established in the introduction and that became increasingly, perfectly relevant as the episode continued. She had the careful, deliberate communication style of someone who chose words precisely because she spent her days with people for whom every word was still new. She approached questions the way she approached her classroom, with patience, with thought, with genuine intention to get things right. Steve asked, "Name a word you would use to describe the perfect husband." Amber paused. This was a question she was taking seriously. She was not going to rush this. She was going to give the correct answer. "The buzzer," she said. "Functional." Steve Harvey took a full step backward. He stood completely still. He let the word settle in the room the way a stone settles in water, ripples spreading in all directions. "Functional," he said. "The perfect husband is functional." Amber nodded with conviction. "He works. He operates. He does the things that need to be done when they need to be done. He is reliable and consistent and functional." Steve looked at the audience. The audience looked at Steve. "Baby," Steve said, with the gentleness of a man who is choosing his words while every instinct he has is pointing in a different direction, "that is the single lowest bar I have ever heard cleared in 22 years of hosting this show." Functional, he looked at Linda. "Your father, Gerald, who you check every morning for signs of continued life, he's functional?" Amber thought about this honestly and carefully. "He's a little above functional," she said. "He loads the dishwasher." Steve pressed his handkerchief to his face. "From the family row," Linda said, without looking up. "He loads it wrong." The studio fell completely silent for 1 second, and then erupted louder and longer than it had at any point in the entire episode. Crew members who are trained to remain neutral and professional during tapings were no longer doing that. The sound technician had put down his headphones. The Martindale family on the opposite side of the stage were holding each other for support. Steve recovered. He straightened his jacket. He walked back to the podium with the careful step of a man who has been somewhere else for a moment and is now returning to the task at hand. He looked at the Patterson women, Linda, Renee, Carol, Patrice, and Amber. 5 women in purple blazers who had, in the span of 45 minutes, delivered an unrequested and entirely comprehensive sociological study of marriage in contemporary America. He said, "I want to say something." The room quieted. "I have been doing this show for a long time. I have sat across from a great many families. But the Patterson women have given me something tonight I was genuinely not prepared for." He paused. He looked at Amber, a new word for success. He said it again, functional. Amber beamed. Linda folded her arms with the quiet authority of a woman who has been correct about something for 34 years and has learned to wait. "Gerald," Steve said, looking directly into the nearest camera, "Sir, wherever you are tonight, I salute you. You functional man." The Martindale family from Nashville deserves a moment of their own, because they were legitimately excellent, coordinated, funny, quick, and in complete competitive command of 2 full rounds before the Patterson family's particular style of honesty simply overtook the environment. The Martindales were playing the game. The Pattersons were narrating their lives. These are not the same activity, and on this particular Thursday in Atlanta, narrating life turned out to be the more culturally resonant enterprise, even when it didn't land on the board. The Martindale captain, a woman named Diane, sharp, 52, who had played every question with the focused attention of someone who had studied for this, had watched Linda's breathing check answer with an expression that moved through surprise, recognition, and a final landing place that was clearly "I cannot believe she said that" on television, followed immediately and clearly by, and yet I absolutely believe it. She had looked at her family afterward with wide eyes. Her sister had mouthed something back at her that the cameras did not catch. Whatever it was, both of them laughed, and then composed themselves and got back to the game. The Pattersons did not win the episode. The Martindales won it cleanly and deservedly. But as the credits rolled, something happened that was not scheduled and not scripted. The Martindale family captain walked across the center stage line to Linda Patterson and said, quietly, woman to woman, I check mine every morning too. Linda looked at her. It is, Linda said, the responsible thing to do. They laughed. They embraced. Steve Harvey watched this exchange from the center of the stage and said nothing, because nothing was needed. The moment was already complete. When the episode aired 5 weeks later, the clip traveled at a speed the production team had not seen in years. It was viewed 85 million times in the first week. The hashtag #StillBreathing trended in 22 countries simultaneously for 4 days. Marriage therapists shared it. Relationship podcasters analyzed it. A cardiologist in Denver shared it on social media with the caption, "This is technically sound medical advice." Irregular breathing during sleep is a real issue. Linda Patterson is doing the right thing. Gerald Patterson, watching the episode at home with 2 of their grandchildren, reportedly said, upon seeing his wife describe her morning routine on national television, "I had no idea." Linda, according to her own account, told him, "That's because you're always asleep when I do it." 3 months after the episode aired, Steve Harvey mentioned Linda on his radio program. Linda Patterson, he said, is one of my absolute favorite people I have encountered in all my years on this show. She said something so simple and so honest and so deeply true that it is going to stay with me. She doesn't check on Gerald because she doesn't trust him, or because she is worried he is in danger. She checks on Gerald because after 34 years of sharing a life with someone, the first thing you want to know every morning is that they are still there. That is not morbid. That is love. The quiet kind. The kind that lasts. He stopped. Gerald, man, I'm telling you, that man has no idea what he has. A year after the taping, Linda Patterson was invited to speak at a women's conference in Little Rock on the topic of long-term marriage. She prepared no notes. She stood at the podium and said, "Love does not always look like a movie. Sometimes it looks like standing at the side of a bed at 6 in the morning, watching for movement, and feeling relief when you find it. That relief, quiet, small, private, that is love. The kind that endures, the kind that stays, the kind that shows up at 6 a.m. before it shows up anywhere else." The room gave her a standing ovation she was not expecting. She thanked them. She said she needed to get home because Gerald had been alone since noon. Amber has since updated her description of the ideal partner to functional, communicative, and loads the dishwasher correctly. She has shared this standard on social media, where it received significant and immediate support. Gerald Patterson has watched the correct dishwasher loading tutorial on YouTube 3 separate times. The dishwasher situation, Linda says, remains ongoing, but progress has been made. He's above functional now, she has conceded. We're working toward capable. She says this with the specific, peaceful optimism of a woman who has checked on the same man every morning for 34 years and has recently begun to understand that capable was always the destination. Functional was just the honest starting point. Today, Linda is something of a quiet local legend in Little Rock. People recognize her at the grocery store and tell her she said exactly what they were thinking. Men apologize to her preemptively on behalf of their own sleep patterns. Women say the word functional to her with a look that requires no further elaboration. And every morning, Gerald Patterson waves from the bedroom window when Linda goes out, something he started doing the morning after the episode aired, so she wouldn't have to come back inside to check on him. He has done it every morning since. Linda has not spoken about this publicly. But people who know her say that when the subject comes up, she looks exactly the way a person looks when they have been loved correctly by someone who finally, after 34 years, and one nationally televised game show moment. Understood what that meant. If this perfectly, joyfully, honestly funny episode of Family Feud made you laugh out loud, and maybe also feel something unexpectedly real in your chest, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with every woman you know who has been married long enough to understand exactly what Linda was talking about, and every man who needs a gentle reminder that functional is a floor, not a ceiling. Have you ever given a game show answer that made more sense than anything on the survey? Tell us in the comments. And ring that notification bell, because more moments where real people say the most honest things in the funniest possible ways are coming every week. Do not miss a single one.